Hey guys, I want to talk today about human genetics from the alien perspective and from what we can learn from good sources. And the two sources I think are the best to study, which, as I will say repeatedly, is number one, the Zeta Interviews. This is a free PDF you can find online. And there's also Zeta Interviews 2, and there's the Zeta Primer, which is sort of like an introduction to it. And then I think the raw material, which is called The Law of One now. It's also free PDFs online. And you can see, I think those are very clear communications. They're really, really good to study. I think that those are legitimate, positive communications. And when you see what they tell us about the human body, human genetics, and how it all works, it's very, very interesting. So, the first thing to keep in mind is that when you take a step back and you look at what you are and what you're doing here on this planet is, first there's just the source consciousness, which is, the creator, the mother, the father, the originating principle, whatever it is that you want to call it. The source consciousness is an infinite consciousness, like some sort of infinite, field, intelligent field. I mean, who knows? You can't really describe it. And it's separating itself into infinite facets. It's creating for itself infinite dimensions, infinite realities, universes, planets, everything, infinite races, because it's experiencing itself. So the structure that it has decided to explore in this universe and on this planet is this type of physicality that we experience now. There's other types of physicality probably in our galaxy and in other galaxies. There's other universes, there's other dimensions, which from our perspective would not be physical, but from inside of those dimensions, they would perceive themselves to be physical in some sense. They'd have some concept of physicality. It would just be very different from ours. You can experience this yourself when you're in dream states. You're leaving your body in a dream and you're moving up through dimensions into the astral, and you can experience that physically. You can hear things, you can taste things, you can see things, you can see colors. But right now we are here incarnate on this planet. And the structure of this exploration that we're all going through is consciousness interacts with your physical body via the etheric body. So the etheric body, it's an energy. It's related to the unified field that pervades this entire universe, which is itself a living conscious thing. So you can think of the hierarchy is consciousness, energy, matter. That's basically what's happening. Everything is an emanation of consciousness. Consciousness, it first emanates some type of energy, which is multidimensional, although it's, from our perspective, it's some form of electromagnetic field. But it's really, that's probably just the part of it that we can see. And then that field freezes itself. It creates particles. Like the particles are not really things. It's they're waveform structures. You can think of it as like ripples in a pond. If you see a pond and you see a wave traveling across the surface, the wave is part of the pond. So it's forming a unique structure, but it's nothing but the pond itself taking on a different shape. That's what all the particles are basically. So everything is basically this unified field, which you can call the ether, but it's like an energetic multidimensional field, which we predominantly perceive as electromagnetic. So that's the basic structure. Consciousness interacts with your physical body via the etheric body. So when a human is born or conceived, what happens is that the act of conception creates a new, unique set of DNA. That DNA determines the physical structure of that body that's forming. And so that body starts to form. The cells start to split and do everything that they do. If you, as your higher self, see a body, and you will already have had a relationship with your mother, you will already have, the Zetas say that the spirits attach themselves to the mother before conception. So that's why races, like the Zetas, can read the energy of a woman and understand how many children she's going to have, because the spirits are already attached to her. They're already kind of waiting, essentially. As the fertilized egg starts to split and starts to form the body, the spirit, so the higher self, via its one aspect of this particular spirit that it's projected out, will start to interact with the etheric body that starts to form around the fetus. As the fetus develops, everything that we see that's physical has an etheric shape to it. And the physical body that you form in the womb starts to generate its own etheric field. And so your consciousness, your spirit, which is really your higher self, one aspect of your higher self, will start to interact with the fetus as it's developing via the etheric body. It starts to kind of integrate with it and blend with it. The higher self, if it wants to have a particular experience, let's say the higher self wishes to have a deformity in life because it's going to provide a certain set of challenges it thinks it's going to learn from, and it's going to give it the opportunity for spiritual growth. It can create that deformity in the womb. Now, other things can happen in the womb. It's not the future is open, and you have free will, everyone else has free will, and there are unexpected things that can happen. There's surprises. And as your body is developing in the womb, other energies will affect it, other physical things will affect it. Things can happen. So if you see a person that has a deformity, it could be they caused it themselves via their higher self because they want that experience. They may have done it not for their own experience, but because they have an agreement with another person, and for that other person to have the experiences they need, it's important that this person has a deformity or a learning disability or something going on. It could be. So, for example, imagine a case where the mother needs to have the experience of caring for a very sick child, because for whatever reason, the two higher selves say, okay, that's going to be a good experience for you. Okay, one higher self might say, I agree to come in as a sick child. It can happen. The way that the higher self would then create that situation, if it doesn't happen naturally via the genetic structure of the developing fetus, is to directly influence the etheric body as the fetus is forming and give the child the sickness or whatever it is that the higher self needs. It can also happen accidentally, or maybe what the higher self wants is just whatever, some other type of experience, and so it just lets the body develop naturally, and then just the pure DNA is just doing what it does, and it creates the physical form that eventually is born. And if nothing else goes wrong, there's no other energies that interfere. Nothing happens to the mother while she's pregnant. The mother doesn't do anything to herself while she's pregnant. Okay, then you're born. Then the person is born, and then throughout life, the consciousness will always interact with the physical body via the etheric body, and it's a two-way communication. If something happens to the physical body, that's reflected in the etheric body. If the consciousness wants to make a change, it changes the etheric body, which is then reflected in the physical body. So information is flowing, back and forth continuously, and it, appears to be extremely complex, and it manifests in extreme complexity, and many, many things can happen. But then it creates this really, incredible opportunity for physical incarnation, and for a consciousness to give itself, or at least attempt to give itself, certain experiences. Now, there are issues with the human race at the moment because we're at the stage of our development where we don't have a fully formed collective consciousness. We are developing it, and it's moving very rapidly, and it's going to move even more rapidly in the very near future. I mean, we're on an exponential curve, and things like the AI singularity are part of that. It's just a lot of things going on. There's energy hitting the planet, and there's all sorts of weird stuff happening. But the issue that the human race has right now is that there's billions of us. Everyone has some sort of different plan for their incarnation. Some people are incarnating at random. I would guess, and there's information in the raw material that says maybe about half of people just incarnate at random, because if you are, imagine the concept of a young soul, which is valid. If you are, a relatively young soul, let's say your higher self still has a lot to learn, a random incarnation may be really useful to you because everything is useful to you. All catalyst is going to provide an interesting learning opportunity. So you have people incarnating at random. You have some people that are becoming aware of their spiritual development throughout lives. So in the in-between life stage, they're becoming more and more aware. Those higher selves are developing more and more. And so they're starting to try to choose certain incarnations and certain plans for a life to give themselves a certain set of experiences, challenges, whatever the case may be, to hopefully achieve some sort of spiritual growth. Because remember, it just happens to be the case, and I think it's because of the restriction of free will that we experience while we're incarnate, that being incarnate gives you an opportunity to develop spiritually much faster than you can in the in-between life stages. The issue with being a higher self in the spirit realm is that spirit realm is extremely reactive to consciousness, and you can create anything around you. So you can very easily put yourself in a situation where you're essentially just chilling at the beach forever because that's kind of what you want, and you're not going to put yourself in a tough situation because it's uncomfortable. And you might know that. And if you knew that at any moment, if you're going through a difficulty, you can just snap your fingers and the difficulty goes away. How many people would say, no, I'm going to keep going through this difficulty because it's good for me? It's like no one really wants to take their medicine. So the way to take your medicine is to say, you know what, I'm going to incarnate. I'm going to have no memory, and I'm going to have very limited abilities. Abilities in terms of the ability of your consciousness to affect the world around you. That means that I'm going to have to go through a certain set of experiences as a physically incarnate being with limited potential, but still with a high degree of free will. And then it's like, let's see if I can make myself learn this lesson that I need to learn. That's essentially what's going on. Now, the problem with the human race at the moment is that we're not coordinating because we don't have a collective consciousness. So you have billions of people incarnating, some at random, some with a plan, but someone else's plan might interfere with your plan. Someone may incarnate at random, and so they're out there just YOLO, doing whatever they want, and so things can get a little bit messy. So it means that the learning process isn't perfect, and you might have a lot of false starts, and I imagine that you do. I imagine we all have. So you might have a plan for a life to say, okay, I'm going to come in, I'm going to incarnate, this is going to be the body, I'm going to let the body form like this, and then I'm going to meet all these other people during my life, and then that should give me all these sets of challenges, and then things will change as the life moves on, and I'm sure the higher self adapts the plan. But the problem is when there's really no coordination. Is this someone else's plan might be very, very different. Their plan might be, hey, I want to, I actually like the negative path, and I like the path of darkness. I don't want to radiate light. I want to absorb it. So. Did you account for that in your plan? Because now this guy's running around, and he's got a whole different set of goals. That might interfere with you, or things kind of happen by surprise or at random, or so it's a very messy environment. End result is it's slow. It's a slow learning process, and you can get stuck. You can get stuck as an individual, and you can get stuck as a race. And it appears to be the case that we have hit a bit of a we're developing as a race, but we're moving slowly. There's races that have developed much faster than us. I don't think it's good or bad. It just happens to be the way it is. All experience is useful to the source consciousness. It's all interesting. So I'm sure it's interesting for the source consciousness to experience the type of development that we're experiencing, and to experience this, slow development, just like it must be interesting to experience, very, very fast development. But, a race can get stuck, and a race can get itself into a situation where the challenges it's giving itself and all these factors are adding up to a quite dangerous situation where, you have people developing at different rates with different purposes. Some are positively oriented, some are negatively oriented. The race starts to develop technology. That technology can be dangerous, and all sorts of things can go wrong. So that's why we are, receiving some level of guidance. Now, you've got to remember that the races, the positively oriented races, will not interfere with our learning process because they know that you need to learn. You need to go through it yourself, and so they don't want to get involved in that because it defeats the purpose. It defeats the purpose of learning. It's the whole point is for us to go through this process. However, if we, via our free will, ask for help, you can receive help, and many people are asking for help, and you can get help. And the races can help in different ways. And it appears to be the case that there has been genetic manipulation of the human race in the distant past. That's actually how the race was, our race was created, is that there were hominids. At least to some degree, the hominids evolved. You can call it naturally. It's not random evolution because there's no such thing. But the consciousness of the planet is basically putting out forms, and one of those forms was the hominid ape. And then many races apparently, have come and manipulated, here and there until at some point probably in the scale of, a couple 100,000 years ago or something like that, a race came and did the final tweaks that gave us the higher intelligence that we have now, which greatly increased the possibilities for consciousness to enter the human form, develop, and then you have new individuated consciousness, and then eventually, a new race. So that's kind of, roughly speaking, what's happening. Now, it's very interesting that, you hear people talking about ascension and DNA upgrades and things like that, and that's not the case. That's not going to happen. There's no such thing. There's no need for it. There's nothing wrong with your DNA. You have everything that you need right now. You don't have to wait for someone to come in and manipulate your DNA to unlock powers, to unlock any latent abilities. None of that's necessary, and it's not going to happen. Everything that you need, you can do right now in consciousness. There's nothing stopping you at all. There's nothing stopping the human race. And we are actually doing those things that we need. We are actually developing the higher levels of consciousness that we need. So the concept, the idea of there's going to be some sort of ascension of the human race, which is going to be some sort of, we're unlocking a new DNA strand or some DNA manipulation, that's not the case. The Zeta are very clear about it. I think you can see the same thing in the raw material. Everything comes down to spiritual development. And the human form contains everything it needs right now. In fact, it contains a lot more than you need right now. Most of that is latent. It's undeveloped. And you could be much more powerful, let's say, than you are right now if you started to develop your consciousness. But it's entirely up to you. And I know it's difficult. It's difficult for me. But that is precisely the challenge. And that is, for example, what Jesus and people, personages like Jesus showed us. You have everything you need. The human form has everything you need. You don't need a DNA upgrade. You don't need anything else. You can do it all right now if you can achieve the right states of mind, the right levels of consciousness. You can work miracles, essentially. That's how Jesus was able to work miracles. There's nothing special about him in the sense that his DNA was any different. He was completely 100% human. He was just able to manifest the Christ consciousness. He was able to manifest these higher states of consciousness. That's it. You can do it too. We all can do it in principle. It's just difficult to do, but that's the challenge. That's why we're here. So I would just urge you to, if you think that you need to wait for something to happen in the future, whether that's some sort of ascension and DNA manipulation, or whether that's your own death, and that you think that, when I die, then the gates of infinity will open for me and I'll see everything. No, that's not going to happen. Everything you need to do now, right now, while you're incarnate. This is the time to do it. This is the moment to work on yourself, and you have right now an incredible opportunity to do it. That's what's so beautiful about being in the human form. The human form has everything it needs. There's nothing wrong with your DNA. And even if, let's say you walk around and you see people, that there's people that are, the human race is extremely diverse. There's short people, there's tall people, strong, weak, smart, not so smart. You might say, well, there's some DNA problem with those people over there or that person, or why did this happen? Or, I feel sorry for this person. Even if it's difficult to understand, and sometimes I think it's natural to see certain things that are happening and have compassion, and that may be why that person did it, to let other people practice compassion. But you have to remember that all experience is useful and beautiful in its own way to the Creator. All life is sacred. And everyone is going through some learning process in some way on their own. So even if you may not understand it, and from the outside, it may seem unfair, or why would that person be born that way? Why would that happen to that person during their life? You just don't know what's going on behind the scenes. You don't know what their higher self is trying to do. And that's why it appears to be the case, from everything you can see in the materials from the Zeta, and I think also in Ra, that at the very least, I'd say for many centuries, many humans will continue to be born in the natural way, the way we're doing it now. It doesn't matter how advanced our technology gets. It doesn't matter how good we get at gene editing, which is another topic that's going to be dangerous. There's potential there for good things, but it's going to be dangerous. Because there are many higher selves for whom the experience of being born as a natural human is going to be very useful. And they're going to want that. So we're going to see, good old-fashioned humans be born for quite some time, I suspect. At the same time, there's going to be people who have, let's say you are ready for a new type of experience, and then I don't know exactly how that's all going to shake out, but there's going to be, I don't know, we may perceive it as technological perhaps or something, or maybe it is going to be gene editing. I don't know. We'll have to see. But there's going to be people that are basically essentially developing in consciousness at a different pace or a different rate, or they've already had many more lives and they're already ready to move on. And those people will, in part, you will see that there are people, and I think we're going to start seeing it very soon. It should probably already be visible, and to a certain degree, it actually already is. That you're going to see people that are born with a much stronger connection to their higher self, with memory of past lives. As the collective consciousness really, really starts to develop, very rapidly, telepathic abilities are going to start to become more common. In part, we're going to have support from the biological AI that we're building, but also in part, people are going to be born, people that are ready to, move on to the next phase of development are going to be born in such a way that those abilities are just going to be easier to come to the forefront. Interestingly, I don't think that you're going to be able to see any genetic changes in them. In other words, I think in 100 years from now, there's going to be people that are born that remember their past lives. I think if you do a DNA test on them and compare it to us now, there's not going to be any difference, because all these changes are essentially in consciousness and with the etheric body, and the way the etheric body is interacting with, the energy of the planet and the collective consciousness and things like that. You're not going to see any physical DNA changes unless we engineer ourselves. Because again, you don't need it. That's the beauty of this. You don't need to mess around with your DNA. You have everything you need. You have it right now. So I think it's, it helps to keep in mind as you look at everything that's happening on the planet, and especially, now the human race is at a stage where we have very high, we have a lot of travel. People can go anywhere they want. You start to see all these differences between people and clashes and conflict. And, and you can kind of wonder, at least I do sometimes, it's like, man, what the heck, what in the heck is going on here? Why is this so difficult for us to grow and progress together as a race? And part of that is just, we're a diverse race physically, because there's been just a lot of different genetic intervention in the past, and that just made changes. And then also everyone, we're a diverse race in terms of, spirit. Spiritually, we're very diverse. And some people that have maybe learned a little bit faster, had more lives. Keep in mind that you can incarnate at a faster rate or a slower rate. So some people have a lust for life, and they incarnate much faster, much more, and they probably give themselves bigger challenges, and maybe they can learn from those. Some people might just take a more relaxed approach. So you're going to see different rates of spiritual growth, and then that's going to affect how they incarnate, into what kind of bodies they incarnate, and all sorts of things. So it's it makes a very messy situation. But it's good to always keep in mind that all experience is useful. Someone is learning from that. You may not be able to see it, you may not be able to understand it, but at some level, there's a higher self that's learning from that experience, and for whom that experience is useful. And all life is sacred anywhere in the universe. Doesn't matter what it is. So at no point should you, judge or just think that you have a genetic superiority to anyone else, or someone else has a genetic superiority to you. There is no such thing. All humans have the ability to do whatever it is that they need to do right now in order to develop spiritually. And the human body, the human container is actually, quite amazing. Not only can it host your consciousness, it appears to be the case from what we learned from the Zetas, that it can host, multiple consciousness can blend together to create a new singular unified consciousness that can then enter a human form and have a set of experiences. This is what the Zeta call, they call it the hybrid process, where it's a hybrid in consciousness. That's where you get, let's say a spirit consciousness and an extraterrestrial consciousness, and they can blend to varying degrees. And it can be a very fluid blend, where sometimes the spirit is more in the front, sometimes the ET is more in the front, but they will together join and enter a human body and have a human incarnation. So many races are experiencing what it's like to be human. In part so they can help us out, in part because from the inside of the race, they can do things that don't infringe on free will because now they are a human. So it's a way for them to support us from the inside. In the raw material, they call this wanderers. In another place you'll see them called star seeds and things like that. And that is real. I mean, that's happening. I mean, right now there's, it appears to be the case that there's millions and millions, probably into the hundreds of millions of people that have some element of another consciousness blended with them from, many, many different races. Some people will experience this perhaps as inspiration, a certain type of curiosity about things, curiosity about the kind of things that we're discussing now, because they're already, at some level in their subconscious, they feel that there's something, there's kind of, something going on. And it turns out, okay, there may be, essentially alien influence. But it's if you say that, it sounds weird, like, I don't know, like there's an alien in a spaceship and he's, looking at a screen, just like, punching buttons and it's affecting you. It's not. It's everything is just consciousness. It's consciousness, developing in different ways and experiencing different things. And there's different groups of consciousness. There's different individuated forms of consciousness, and all of them see, this particular planet as an interesting place, an interesting set of possible experiences. We happen to be the individuated forms of consciousness that chose this as our main form of learning. And we said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go to that planet. At some point, at some level, you did this, even if it's, way, way in the distant past. He said, I'm going to use that as my vehicle for individuating and developing a unique personality over a long, long period of time, over many, many lives. Some see this as, they did that somewhere else, in another part of the universe, in another galaxy, in another dimension, whatever it is. And then they come and see this. It's like, oh, this is interesting. What's happening on this planet? Okay, it might be cool let me try a human life. I don't know. Let's see what it's like. And they can do that. And others are essentially seeing, some of the struggles that the human race is going through, and they're saying, okay, how do we help the human race? It's good for the human race. It's good for them too, because the last thing anyone wants in the galaxy is a bunch of monkeys running around with weapons, and like actually developing, spaceships, and now we're flying out and we've got, dangerous weapons. So, they're thinking, okay, we need to help the human race develop spiritually. We need to help all the individuals. We can't infringe on their free will. And it's going to be good. It's going to help them develop. Then they can develop a proper collective consciousness and join in with everything else that's happening in the galaxy and in the universe. And it's also going to be good for them because, it's like if you have a neighbor and if like your next door neighbor, if you see that they're buying a lot of guns all of a sudden, and they're, I don't know, who knows what they're doing. They're doing a lot of crazy things. You might say, well, I should keep an eye on this and see what's going on over there. So there are a lot of reasons why the positively oriented races would find it interesting to come and incarnate into the human form and take on all the challenges and the limitations of human genetics. It's a potential learning experience for them. Maybe there's some spiritual growth that they have to do that it's going to be easier, or they can do it in a very interesting way via the human form. They can help the human race. There's a lot going on. There are also, negative races that have a totally different set of goals. They might be seeing this as an opportunity to gain some sort of control over another race, or to come in and, they have their own desire for creating, in the same way that the positive races want to create this energy of radiant light and love and things like that. There's other races that want to create negative energy. And so they might come in and, do things. I don't think that they typically can incarnate, because from what the Zeta tell us, that requires, probably in almost all cases, it appears to be true across the board generally, that requires acceptance or agreement between a spirit, like a human spirit, and the ET races, and it turns out that the human spirits can kind of sense the malevolence, and so the negative races don't incarnate as humans, but they can mess with us in a lot of different ways, and they're doing that, and that's what's behind a lot of the problems they see on the planet now. But that's just part of the development process, just like dealing with a bully. It's like in school, sometimes you have to deal with bullies, and so you do. It's part of the learning process. You get through it. So, anyways, kind of hope that helps. Just wanted to, discuss a little bit the human form and some of these ideas of that you see of ascension and human genetics, and especially now that we can see the human race really is quite diverse. What does that mean? And what could that possibly mean? And I think we should also be prepared for, I think in the very near future, we're going to have our ability to genetically modify our bodies is going to be much, much more advanced, and we're going to be able to do a lot of things. And, there may be some benefits to that in some cases, but there are a lot of dangers to it as well. And then I think that we have to keep in mind that there's really nothing wrong with it. However you are right now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with you, nothing wrong with your genetics. I don't really see the need for modifying your genetics a whole lot. I think most of what we're going to do in the future as it relates to our body is going to be the type of etheric technologies that we see the advanced races describe. So the Zeta describe, most of their healing technology is they affect the etheric body, and then the changes they make in the etheric body are reflected into the physical. But there is the possibility of genetic modification. The Zeta have done that to themselves. I don't know if it's such a good thing, and I don't know. If you read what they've said, I think that they would say overall it's positive, because what they essentially did is they modified some of the emotional responses that they're capable of having, because they also went through a lot of aggression, and so maybe that's good, and they've reached the possibility of these conscious states, which they describe as stillness. But also, I think that they recognize at some level that they've cut off an avenue of the, since they have restricted their emotional responses, they've kind of, maybe cut off an avenue of potential growth for themselves, and so they've become very, very technical, and whereas we're much more emotional, and maybe the right answer is to be, a little more in the middle, and to achieve a balance. And I think that's part of the reason. I think at least with the Zeta in particular, that's part of the reason that they're interested in helping us out. I think, first of all, they're very ethical, and they just, and we're in their neighborhood, so you may as well see what these crazy monkeys are doing. But also I think that they see the possibility that we have something to offer them as well. As they clearly have something to offer us, and they're going to help us, survive this stage and get to the next stage of development. But also we have some of the original possibilities of experiencing emotion that they once had, and that they specifically edited out of their gene lines. And everything has ramifications, and and maybe now they're thinking, what, actually we have to remember kind of the other possibilities of experiencing the universe. I don't know, this is a little bit of speculation on my part, but you can kind of just read the the Zeta interviews, and you'll kind of see what they say. But it's going to be something that's it's going to become a very salient point for us very, very soon. We're going to have the ability to modify our genetics directly in very strong and powerful ways. And man, is that going to be dangerous. I mean, nuclear technology is dangerous, AI is dangerous, but holy cow, modifying your genetics, very dangerous as well. Possibilities for doing great things, possibilities for doing really, really bad things. And personally, I don't know. It makes me nervous. I don't think we're going to need it. Personally, I think I'm just going to stay natural and just focus on developing consciousness. And, I think we'll have, let's call it organic technologies, etheric technologies, things like that I think will make it so you don't really need to do a whole, mess around with your genetics too much. But anyways, guys, I hope that helps. Any questions, just drop them down below. Thanks.